Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Don Webster. I am the Director of e-Business for Business and Decision North America. I'm not going to spend any time really talking about myself today. I've got some contact info on the last slides you can jot down if you'd like to explore some different opportunities with B&D about how we can help you with your dev test in the cloud options. So with that, let's get started on our webcast today, developing and testing in the cloud, and why Windows Azure is an excellent vehicle to make that happen. So let's start with the first bullet point here. What is development and testing? At the core, development and testing is really application lifecycle management. You've probably all heard the phrase, without the actual release process in place for this dev test scenario. This isn't really an easy thing to define. There's a lot of different perspectives around ALM. It encompasses a lot of topics like software architecture, testing, governance, development, and project management, to name but a few. There's a lot of different ways to approach this thing, but that's not a thing we're going to get into today. I just wanted to mention where we're coming from with development and testing piece. So when I talk about dev test in the cloud, what we're really referring to is moving the majority of the infrastructure you use today for dev test into the public cloud. Infrastructure as a service and sometimes platform as a service that are offered in Azure definitely fall into this category, and every application we write today is typically, on probably 100% of the time, hitting a server in some fashion or another for one reason or another, and that server is normally a critical component of that application or service. So those dev test activities we typically hear about: code, compile. You got your automated tests, your unit testing, your build servers, your build boxes, that type of situation. Then you've got your manual tests where those unit tests and automated tests just don't quite cover everything, and you've got to have somebody actually touch the application to verify everything is good. And then experimentation. I'll talk more about the experimentation in a couple slides. I'll be moving on here to differences between production and testing systems. So automobile analogies are always easy, so I'm going to go with one here as well and use that to compare the differences between dev test and prod. So when I think of production, I think of a Ford F-350. Strong, reliable, trustworthy come to mind, right? Big vehicle, I know I can start it up and I know it'll run forever without really complaining. It just works. This is the stability part of my application scenario. It meets one of the core tenets of a successful app by being there 24/7, no matter what the weather is like on the outside. And when I think dev test, I think more of a Tesla Roadster. Ridiculously quick, nimble, light on the feet, and fast are some of the adjectives that come to mind with dev test. Now, for dev test, I really need an environment that's flexible and one that I can create and provision quickly. Something that allows me to, say, snapshot my environment very easily, replicate those systems on demand as needed, collaborate and share with other developers, my testers, my user community that's doing my final UAT testing, and provide that seamless integration with the development tools that I'm using today. And if you're here for the Azure, you're probably using Visual Studio, and rest assured that there's a lot of wonderful integration between those two systems. So moving on, we'll hit rapid dev test cycles, and what does that really mean? So I'd like to talk a little bit about the experimentation we do today with our developers here at B&D and what it means with respect to those rapid development test cycles. So as developers, we get to build and test new things, like dropping in a new client-side library and playing with those animations because they are, they're new and they might be better. Testing out a new algorithm we thought of last week and we think it might be more efficient for running our workflows, or something like adding a slick new API that we think may give us a competitive advantage by allowing a third party to access our system easier. So we like to build, test, watch it fail, blow up in our face, learn from those failures, and do that in a very rapid succession. No meetings, no checking with your manager or a project manager or some supervisory role to see if that's okay, then another meeting to follow up. We just do it. We jump right in, we we build it, we test it out, and if it works, we show it off and let everyone know how awesome we are for figuring that out. It's just the way that we like to work. And developers the world over are really embracing this methodology, and just going with the experimentation route is really paying a lot of dividends as far as the rapid application development cycles. So on that note, it's really almost impossible to make those apps better if we're not innovating through that experimentation and testing these new things we're trying to create. Utilizing the cloud for these types of activities within a testing scenario allows us to either spin up a new test environment or perhaps snapshot a current environment, watch it blow up, then roll it back to the last snapshot and test the next iteration of our code with what we've learned from those failures. No IT guy needed, no one yelling at you because you took down the test system again, and it just makes life a whole lot easier as a developer. Moving on to why you should move your dev test to the cloud. So there's traditionally been a very contentious relationship between IT and developers. Developers can get very angry with IT for being slow, not providing with the actual resources they really need to do their job optimally. And of course, IT is angry with the developers for being too demanding, too whiny, too much of a drain on resources, and pulling them away from their normal daily job duties that they have. Developers are not your typical user. We are demanding, and we take a lot of extra care and feeding than your typical user, and that's probably the main reason that it makes the relationship a much more difficult one to manage between our two parties. From the outside, a lot of people might see IT and developers and testers and all those folks that are involved with that application release schedule and that life cycle as one and the same, but we're very, very different from each other. So moving your dev test to the cloud means immediately getting the developer off the back of IT. And everyone is just happier as a result. The devs get what they want and need quickly, and the IT guy gets the same as well. So once the cloud move is done, we can do super cool things like make small variations in our testing, or doubling the amount of the tests that we need to run. Being able to bring up infrastructure at a moment's notice allows us to isolate that infrastructure to run truly specific testing scenarios without managing a lot of variables in there. So we can get a cleaner result from our tests knowing that our code is going to work the way we envisioned it working without having to go through a lot of pain to configure a testing environment to make sure we're getting that proper result. So by utilizing the cloud, you can run those separate tests on identical configurations with very little effort and make things a whole lot easier for yourself in the testing phase. And finally, why you should move to the cloud is really just cost. We'll go over some of the cool features of Azure in the next slide, and we can talk a little bit about the cost model as well. But the general cloud cost model is a resources based on consumption. And no capital outlay is required, and with the pay-as-you-go model, it just makes a lot of sense to move dev test into the cloud, period. There's really no reason, unless you've got something that's just really specific for your particular situations, that you need to hold on to those legacy servers and have to manage that infrastructure today. It's a lot smarter to move it up to the cloud where it can be done cheaper and faster and give you more flexibility. All right, let's jump over to some stuff about Windows Azure. Now, Azure, if you are familiar with it at all, has a ridiculous amount of awesome features. We've got the infrastructure as a service, we've got platform as a service, we've got ADFS, we've got DirSync, which is the ability to replicate your Active Directory up to the cloud, so your authentication pieces, if you're running an internal app, are very, very easy to do up there in the cloud without a lot of work. You can fire up VPN tunnels from Azure to help with database synchronization. There's a ton of options that allow you to just have that hybrid coexistence model with having your dev test in the cloud and still having your on-premise stuff without a lot of issues. And it's really, really easy to configure, and it makes the IT guys happy that it's simple and they don't have to deal with it once it's all set up. So from a services standpoint, Azure has a lot. We've got obviously the VMs, the website instances, the database instances. There's cloud services, there's compute services, there's media services, Service Bus, BizTalk services. We've got TFS in the cloud, Visual Studio Online, all the Active Directory stuff I mentioned. We've got multi-factor authentication stuff in there. There's a lot of big data pieces up there that can be managed as well. There's traffic networks, traffic managers, there's virtual networks. The list goes on. Obviously, all of these services are really worthy of a separate webcast. I'm just trying to give you guys a list of what is out there today. There's stuff that's always coming into preview within Azure. The scheduler, the billing alert service are coming up there, and then they've got some geo-redundant data storage stuff coming up. They've got an enhanced version of Active Directory coming up as well, export and import services, and then they've got some premium SQL database stuff coming up as well. So there's always a ton going on up there, and it just gets better and better. And the great thing is that it gets cheaper with Amazon and Rackspace and all these guys competing against each other. The price drops are actually pretty irregular. As soon as one of them makes a price cut, Azure follows suit within a few days. So we're getting the best of both worlds here with the hassle-free use of the cloud, and then the cost model that just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper. So a couple of the cool features from a testing standpoint here on Azure, we've got when you bring up your virtual machines, you're only being charged when they're turned on. So that test environment that you've got, let's just say you do most of your UAT on Thursdays before your demos on Fridays, you've only got to turn that on Thursdays. So you're only paying for 1 day of service for those VMs that you're using up there today. Anytime you stop a VM, there's no charge. They used to charge for storage, and then they turned that down, which was great. So we've got pay by the minute billing, so you don't get charged. They don't round up to an hour. If it's on for 17 minutes, you get billed for 17 minutes. If you've got MSDN subscriptions, then you've got a lot of nice usage rights in there, and there's some heavily discounted rates for the dev test stuff with the MSDN. And the higher level MSDN you've got, the more money you get. So basically, they'll give you a couple $100 a month for monetary credits from MSDN. I don't remember all the pricing for each specific level of MSDN, but if you're running a pretty small test environment and you're using MSDN today, the cost for doing this is virtually nothing, if not less than nothing, because you're not consuming all those MSDN credits up there. So cost, kind of covering that pieces. So let's see, we can break down the pricing. It varies based on the size of the virtual machine that you're going to do, and that's primarily what you're going to typically go with your testing scenarios. So we've got extra small, small, medium, large, and extra large instances now in Azure. For an example, I do a SharePoint Server 2013, just a single server. I've got it on a large system, which is just enough to basically run SharePoint and have a dev environment sitting in there. So I can actually do my dev up there in the cloud from anywhere I am, whether I'm working from the home office or here at the corporate office for B&D. It doesn't make any difference, which is pretty fantastic. So I don't have to worry about toting along a laptop. I can hit it from any system as long as I've got access to the internet. So that's the flexibility there is really nice, and that costs me typically about $200 a month when I use it a lot. Last month I didn't use it that much. It cost me $10. So it's incredibly flexible from that standpoint. If you just need some small instances for the testing scenarios, you're talking only spending $100, $150, $200 a month total, and that's for multiple machines. It just depends on how you have to lay out your stuff. And the flexibility on the scalability with Azure is tremendous. You can have it auto scale. You can use the public cloud stuff where it will handle all those pieces for you. And it just really is a simple thing to jump up into Azure and move that slider over and say, hey, I need a large instance. It just reprovisions and boom, you're done. And it usually just takes a minute or so and it's completely ready to go. So you've got a lot of flexibility on how to enable those environments up there in the Azure space. So there are some limitations from a developer perspective, and one in particular I like to cover. If you guys have ever done development with a local virtual machine like VMware Workstation or the Hyper-V in Windows 8, then you know how easy it is to snapshot and then roll back snapshot. It takes a couple clicks, it takes a few seconds, and it's done and ready to go. So this is one of the places right now where Azure is a little weak. You can definitely snapshot a disk, but you can't snapshot a whole system setup today like you can with the memory configuration, the network configuration, all that stuff. It just disappears because if you snapshot a system, you got to roll it back. It's a little bit of a hassle. You can do it through PowerShell, but it's not the cleanest way. And I have gotten feedback from the Azure team that we have here in contact with here at B&D, and they're definitely looking at making that a lot easier for us in the future. So hopefully the tool set will expand there up there in the IDE to be able to snapshot the entire environment of a machine and not just the disk, and make the snapshot rollback process that much easier for the testing scenarios. All right, moving on, a little bit of, oops, excuse me, I went there too fast. A little bit of how B&D uses Azure. I mentioned the SharePoint development instance I do quite a bit of up there in the Azure cloud. So the most important scenarios in the development process is where Windows Azure comes in are probably the test environments. You know, we do in-house or team testing or load testing with the Visual Studio Test Manager, depending on the type of project. We've even got some testing going on up there for Java projects that we're doing. So Azure doesn't really care what you're running up there. It'll run PHP. It'll run all types of things that don't happen to be .NET. So there's a lot of flexibility for using this for whatever type of development environment that you're currently running. We also use it for public test environments. So this is where we get our customers involved. When there's an actual UAT release process and we haven't provided any UAT resources, so that it's all on the customer to do that final user acceptance testing on the features or the entire application. So we will, instead of using an on-premise hardware and having to burden their IT department, we'll just spin up an instance in Azure, configure that system, and replicate it if we need to, or increase the size if there's a lot of testers involved to make sure we're handling the load on that server. And then finally, demo environments. We do demo some systems to potential new customers. A lot of that is the SharePoint work we do internally, and also some of the applications that we've written over the years for customers that were not under like an NDA or anything like that we can actually show to the public. We'll have demo environments for these things that we can actually show to the customers, play with those things that are actually affecting a customer's production system. Obviously, I would never want to demo something on a production system for a customer. That'd be a bad deal at the end of the day. So all these environments are really important to us, and the people who are involved in all the work we do here at B&D, and stability and availability are very good. And this is where Azure is really the best choice for B&D when it comes to the cloud providers. We don't need to have endless discussions and negotiations with tech support anymore because Azure just works. There really have been very few instances where Azure hasn't been available to us, so we're very, very pleased with that type of situation that they've created for us. You know, deploying systems to cloud environments is ridiculously easy. You can use Visual Studio for it. You can script it through MS Build or PowerShell. There's a ton of possible options up there. So the integration with TFS is getting better and tighter with every release. So they have made things so simple for us from a development standpoint and a testing standpoint that it's pretty much our go-to option today for utilizing all these things. That was my last slide. I left a few minutes here for questions in case there are any. My contact info is available here on this slide. Unfortunately, the BrightTalk environment we use for presenting these webcasts does not offer a real-time environment that I can demo something for you. I had started to do that, and then I realized that I can't do that with BrightTalk. So I'd be more than happy if anybody would like to go over Azure-specific stuff and see what the environment looks like and get a walkthrough to facilitate that over a separate meeting with a linked screen sharing session or something like that, and potentially recording a video and putting it out on our B&D website as well is always an option if that would be something that anybody would be interested in seeing. Somebody just posted up one question. So there is a question. It's got recommendations on how to back up and protect data that's running in Azure. So I mentioned earlier that you can snapshot a disk for storing you can have those disks snapshotted and then you can revert those disks. Unfortunately, it's not as simple. You got to reconfigure the environment to host the disk, but it's not too much of a hassle. It slows you down if you're doing the speed type thing on the dev and test cycle. So the great thing about Azure is it's really easy to back up protected data that's running in Azure. There's a couple, Azure itself is already wired up to back up all that data for you. You don't really have to worry about it, but if you're really concerned and you want to make sure that that instance is available somewhere else, you can actually just set up an instance in the different time zone, basically. Like they've got different sections of the world they cover with different data centers. There's a West region and an East region. There's a European region. So you can just say, hey, I want to snapshot I want to have a copy of my VMs over in the East region in the U.S. and then set those up with a few clicks, and they move them across the wire for you, and then you can leave them stopped. So you've actually got data sitting in two different instances that you can ring up. And you can also put those into an affinity group where there's load balancing between the two as well. That obviously will help with geolocation within your application. If you've got users all over the world and you want to spread your load around the planet to have Azure actually help you out there, you can actually make all those environments mirrored across the globe, and it'll just magically work. There's a lot of black box technology that goes into this stuff, but it really works very, very well. And another question here, you are charged by the minute that the machine is turned on and they have a limited storage charge. Talk about the charges involved with Azure. Is it solely by the minute or the size of the machine or the storage cost? So there is a minor bandwidth cost. I can bring up the calculator here because I don't remember off the top of my head exactly what that is. But it's not very much. So support is included with Azure. You're charged basically on your VMs by the size of the VM and how long it's running. So you're basically just charged compute time and not the actual, there's X amount of storage that comes with that, and you can actually add more, and you can also add Azure storage. Azure storage is really, really cheap now. It's about, I think it's 6 cents a gig, and I think it's even cheaper for MSDN customers, but I'd have to double check the pricing. So bandwidth charges, let's see here. If I just ran it up to about 100 gigs. It's about, looks like it's about $11 a month for 100 gigs of bandwidth in Azure. So the costs for bandwidth are incredibly low. Most people will never consume anywhere near that. Most people are somewhere in the 5 to 6 gig range typically. 25 gigs is about $2.50. So the costs are pretty cheap. So a large VM in Azure is very cost effective for one workload that has multiple things on it. You've got about 200, I think it was 268 a month or something around that number. Extra large is about $550 a month. So it really is just compute time and a minor bandwidth charge at the end of the day. There's no other costs associated with Azure unless you wanted to add like some Premier support. And obviously, you're charged for every machine when you're spinning up your VMs, and then when they're shut off, there's no charge whatsoever. So production environment question. We do not have any production environments in Azure today. B&D actually has a data center in our corporate headquarters in Wayne, Pennsylvania, and we have an entire managed services and hosting group. So we have quite a few customers that have servers that are running in our data center, but we do have customers that are looking at using the stuff we have built in Azure as an option as well, just for the flexibility, the scalability, that types of things. We can provide the same services at our facility in B&D, but we've only got the one facility, and we have partnering agreements with other places. So to this day, we don't have anything running that I'm aware of in Azure's production environment. It's primarily been dev, test, and demo to this point. So next question, outline why Azure is better than Amazon Web Services. So I think that Amazon does a lot of great things with their offerings. The one thing where Azure really stands out for me is the ease of use. Microsoft has gone to great lengths to create a wonderful portal for us from the IDE's perspective. My only experience with Amazon to this day was having to use PuTTY and SSHN and then run a bunch of scripting commands to spin up virtual machines, and I actually was kind of shocked. It was as difficult as it was, and I was at a conference with a partner at B&D, and I couldn't believe how much time it took to actually get the environment set up just so we could start the training. It was kind of mind-boggling. So that's the biggest differentiator, and I think that Amazon today has a little better database set up. There aren't as many limitations on their side for size. Azure has, I think it's 150 gig database in the public space. Otherwise, you've got to move to a virtual machine to hold those bigger data sets. And also, there are limitations about moving data back and forth between, like, say, an on-prem database. You may need to keep synced up with an organization's, data center. All those databases, if they're moving that data, you can't really do that with the SQL tools you would get out of a VM. So the public-facing databases still have a little bit of way to go, but I know that it's something that's been requested, and I know it's on the roadmap. I just don't know when it's going to happen. And then finally, the last question on the list here is, how secure would our apps be on Azure servers? So I've got a great example for this. We just finished up a request-to-speak application built for the Arizona legislature, and it launched in January. And there were a lot of concerns around security with this. It's their first foray into the public cloud, and they were a little hesitant at first to trust it. So in light of that, they actually had a security firm do an audit on the application up in Azure, and it passed with flying colors. Microsoft has gone to great lengths to make sure that the security piece is covered. I mean, they get hammered every day from penetration attacks and all these different things, and it has yet to actually dent the framework of what they've built. So from a security standpoint, I really don't see any issues whatsoever. And the only, I will say, not to put a political slant on this, but for proprietary data, the only people I would worry about is the NSA at this point in time. So, but Microsoft and Google and Amazon and everybody else have promised us that that is certainly not the case, that there is no way that they can read those proprietary data and files. Everything can be completely encrypted up in Azure, and everything is safe from prying eyes. So even in the public instances, when you put data in Azure, you can rest assured that your database is actually safe from anybody else being able to access it. There are numerous ways to get at stuff with the hybrid coexistence model. If you're really paranoid about that and you still want it to be in the cloud, you can have your own virtual machines up there running a SQL instance, and you can VPN that tunnel, back to your corporate headquarters and never expose that data anywhere but through your VPN tunnel. So there's ways that you can actually enhance that security even further that's already there out of the box with Azure. Let's see here. I think that is all questions, and we've got just a couple minutes left. So unless I see something else pop up here, I'll leave the line open for a couple minutes. I will just say thank you for joining and thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure, and if there's anything I can answer for you more thoroughly, feel free to utilize the contact information on the last slide there, and then we can go from there. Thank you again for joining. You guys have a good day.